So welcome to our session called How to Ace Your G Suite Adoption. Before we kick off, we're going to introduce ourselves. So today's session is going to be delivered to you by Finn, who's EMEA Change and Culture Lead based in London, by Travis, who's America's Change and Cultural Lead based out of Chicago, and myself. My name is Karolina. I'm part of EMEA Change and Culture team as well, based in London. So basically, if some of you were looking for a session how to bump your G Suite project, don't worry. It's exactly the same session, simply two sides of the same coin. Before we kick off, I just would like to ask you how many of you have been to a fail conference? Few people, okay, so I explained the concept. So a fail conference is an event where entrepreneurs share their biggest mistakes and what they learned along the way. It is very centered around the mindset that the best way to progress is to try. And of course, when you try, you don't always win. So it's the try and learn approach. Our session takes a similar approach, and in a sense that we will share with you some of the key mistakes we've seen, we've experienced, and we've heard in the past G Suite deployments. So before we jump into exploring some of the major reasons why G Suite projects can potentially fail, we would like to highlight one assumption we are making. We are not trying to put lipstick on a pig. What I mean by that is that the solution that you are deploying to your users should be sound. In a nutshell, the overall experience for the user should be truly an improvement of their current situation. That's one assumption that I would like to highlight. And let me tell you what bad looks like. For example, numerous security layers on top of G Suite that it's even hard for people to log in, sending encrypted emails. That's one of the examples. Another one could be poor network connectivity. Yet another one, and that's something we've seen less and less so, but still, computers dating from the Stone Age with very limited RAM, so it's very hard to navigate Chrome, for example, okay? So let us be very clear here. Even though in all those examples, G Suite is not the root cause of the issue, the overall experience for the end user is deceptive. So change management, in this case, will not help. We need to make sure that we've got a structured change management for other tactics, but in this particular case, the overall experience for the end users is going to be very negative. And in fact, if your solution is a pig, putting a lipstick on it will not make users embrace it. It will make the situation even worse because they will feel that you're denying their pain. Okay? So basically, what do we do in this type of situation? We would highly encourage you to gather some of the key users, listen to their feedback, rework the solution, and ask them whether they would actually use the solution as is. If a majority of them would say that they wouldn't make a switch, our advice is to basically speak to your project sponsor, think about another solution that you could put in place, rework the solution, and even pause a rollout to deliver something even better in quality. That's our key advice. So with that, moving on to the failure number one, over to you, Travis.
Thanks, Karolina. All right, thank you. As Carol mentioned, I'm Travis Hahler, and I lead our change management efforts from our Americas region, located in Chicago. And I'm excited to be here today because I have failed a lot. So I'm excited to share that with you, and hopefully you won't fail as much as I have or any of us. And you can use this to make your programs even better and stronger and faster in rollout. So let's get right to it. So our first common misconception is that a G Suite project is mostly technical. We often run into sponsors who believe that G Suite deployment is like any other IT deployment that they've encountered, which is that you want to simply deliver a terrific IT deployment and deploy the technology in a way that works. This might seem reasonable from the beginning, but where this causes some issues is actually pervasive as you move on with the project. And that is that people will believe that the technology is the most important part, and they won't actually worry about anything else. So you're setting that precedent up front that technology is the most important piece. So what will happen if we continue down this path? It's a good thing to be focused on the technical aspects of a deployment. We obviously want the technology to be implemented correctly. However, if we put the technology as the only piece of the puzzle that we're focused on, and the only thing that matters, we'll miss out on true transformation and cultural change within your organization. So this technology-first mindset is common when you have a key sponsor who comes from more of an infrastructure side of IT. With that kind of background, typically, the technology projects that they would have been exposed to are highly technical with limited interactions with end users. So these are things like major telecom upgrades, data center migrations, and other such programs. So not a lot of end user involvement. So if the focus is only on technology, people will perceive G Suite as just a replacement of an existing technology. People will not reimagine the way they work today, but expect it to work in the exact same way tomorrow. So you'll get resistance that will occur in the form of a one-to-one functionality between platforms when there's not an exact one-to-one match between the platforms that you're going from and to. Business executives will not be engaged with this type of project because they'll say this is just a technology project. Why should we all be engaged? Let's just engage IT. And they'll provide limited resources in terms of people, in terms of funding, especially when it comes to training and communications, because they won't see it as an end user impact. So what should we do instead? It's great to talk about what we shouldn't do. What should we do? If you're like us and you're convinced that G Suite can actually change your culture and your organization and the way you work, you need to address the two other dimensions of any project, which are first, the people side of change, which focuses on the cultural changes that need to occur to adopt, as well as enabling people to be prepared for the transition. And the process side, which is actually the structural definition of how people do the work that they're expected to do on a daily basis. So this is where you actually have a chance to redesign the business processes and address pain points that people currently experience today. So you need all three of these to actually create that magic in the middle, which is transformation. So these areas are important, especially in a G Suite project, because the scale of the impact is staggeringly different from a regular IT project that's not really touching the end users. So compared to a CRM or an ERP rollout, a G Suite project is going to touch everyone within the organization. So this is why a G Suite project is one of those rare projects that actually touches every department. So all of our business leads should be concerned about it and actually involved in the process. So in practice, what should you do if your sponsor remains focused on a technical aspect and not actually wanting to focus on people and process? First, change the narrative from being just their perspective to being the broader perspective. So ask, why did the company decide to go G Suite? This pulls it out from just one person's opinion to why collectively did we decide to make this change. And you'll get the reasons why all of the executives actually chose G Suite. And likely you'll hear words like collaboration, agility, innovation, culture. Those are what we hear all the time when we talk to our executives. So once you shift that narrative and you've gotten that response, this is actually your opportunity to tie in the people and process as key levers for achieving those goals that the company has actually set up. So let's play this out for a second. Let's imagine that we're in this conversation with our executive sponsor, and we've just asked why they went G Suite, and their response was to become more innovative. So the response to that would be, okay, so you want to be more innovative. A culture of innovation is one of ideas. So where do you typically have your best ideas? Is it in front of your mailbox or maybe looking at your calendar? I imagine the answer to that is probably no, because most people do not have their best ideas looking at their calendar or managing their mailbox. So our best ideas come when we work together collaboratively to create and iterate. So if we only focus on the technical, you'll be able to roll out Gmail and Calendar, no problem. And people will be forced to use it because you have just moved them onto Gmail and Calendar. And they'll learn how to use it because they have to. But G Suite is much more than just email and calendar. And the true power of G Suite comes from the ability to push people to collaborate and work in new and innovative ways through Drive, Slides, Sheets, and Docs. So if you only focus on the technical part, you're going to miss out on the innovation. There won't be an innovation actually happening within the company. So to actually innovate and use G Suite to meet that goal, you'll need to actually reduce the number of meetings by using the collaborative platform that G Suite is. And people can actually collaborate in real time. So that changes the culture and the process of how people interact with one another. So to get to that point, we need to focus on driving adoption, because it's not so much of people just using it, it's the fact that they actually have to understand how to use it. And we need to focus on actually providing the support to the people to be able to work in the new ways and actually learn how to use the new systems that we're using. So when you get to the heart of the reason their company is going G Suite, it's easy to point out the people and process side of the project and have that conversation with sponsors. So the second piece of our fail number one is that focusing on only technology completely leaves out people and also means we're not focusing on overcoming resistance and driving adoption. So focusing exclusively on technology fails to acknowledge one of the key elements of human behavior, which is we're really bad at changing our own behavior. It's a fact. So in fact, the only psychologist to have won the Nobel Prize is a guy by the name of Daniel Kahneman. He won for his study of biases, and one of the pervasive traits that he found was that humans are lazy. And our mind will do things quick and easy if it can. That is the way that we conserve energy. It's the way that we actually drive ourselves through our days. I imagine if you actually had to think about brushing your teeth every morning, it'd be very exhaustive to even get out of bed. So we'll look for the path of least resistance, which is how we've done things the way we've always done it. It's easy, it's quick, and it's simple for our brain to actually do that. So in that case, natural adoption, which is where people just adopt something without you really having to do anything, is probably not something we can expect from a company of this size and scale, right? So to prove this point, let's look at Moore's adoption curve. And experience shows us that populations spread on this curve are according to a couple of different groups. So you've got about 2.5% that are considered innovators. And innovators are people who they want the latest phone, they're the ones who have fully automated their home, they're driving an electric car. I see a few smiles, so you probably recognize yourself, as I do myself. They're the people that, they're really on the front edge of things, and they really want to be involved in everything that's new and exciting. Our next 13.5% is what we call early adopters. So these are not as far along the curve as our innovators, but they're still ahead of the curve of most. They're simply just a little less nerdy, shall we say. Now, what do these groups have in common? Both of these groups measure their personal worth by how much in advance they are compared to the rest of the crowd. So to them, they want to be in all the trusted tester programs. They want to be in the early adopters programs. And they're incredible candidates for those because they're very cool with flexibility and failure. So they will iterate and they will test and they will stress systems to the point of them failing. And they're just fine with doing that. For this reason, you do want them in your early adopters phase because they'll be those people who will test your systems to make sure that they're working. However, you don't want only these people because you're not getting the full perspective. So the rest of the population, that other 85%, they value stability over that novelty that our first two groups value. So these individuals will either be reluctant or resistant to the changes, and you'll actually require change management or some form of intervention of some kind to push them over the edge to actually change. So that's a big piece of your organization. If we only focus on technology and we don't focus on people and process, we're essentially only caring about 15% of our organization. The other 85% is still there, waiting for something to happen to make them change. So what do we do instead? We as leaders and voices of change within our organizations need to get more comfortable with the fact that people will resist change. It is natural, it is a human reaction. So you are reacting in your most basic instinct to resist a change on you. So we can't do anything about that. But we can actually anticipate that resistance. So by building a strong case for change, we can anticipate that resistance and help people overcome it. So things like giving people the why of why we are changing, providing opportunities for your employees to learn about G Suite and the new ways of working. Address your user groups as unique and plan for their specific journey. Don't just lump them all into one big group. And hold open Q&A sessions to leverage top executives to drive participation. And finally, create an FAQ list. And don't just create the standard FAQ list, which is like, what are we doing? What is G Suite? Et cetera. Do the hard questions, because there's questions out there that people will never ask you, but they'll ask themselves and they'll ask others around them, which makes it difficult for them to adopt because no one seems to know the answer to it. So that kind of moves us into our next fail, which typically occurs after that kind of kickoff stage as we move into our stakeholder analysis. There are many different ways of doing a stakeholder analysis, but what it boils down to is making sure that you know who needs to be involved and when for your project. So this brings about a typical conversation around executives and how to engage them. And typically this goes in three ways. First response is usually our executives are under the gun, and to get this project done quickly, they need to be focused on actually delivering the project, so we shouldn't bother them. The second is schedules are so difficult, it'll be hard to even get 30 minutes, which is that really valuable? Should we just move forward? And the third, which brings us kind of back to fail number one, is I don't think we should really be bothering executives for an IT project. So what will happen if we don't involve our executives? I think it's a pretty easy one, but do you think any real transformation can happen without executive support? The answer is no. No transformation of any kind has actually really happened without some form of executive approach or support. So if you want to truly transform the way you work and the culture of your company through a platform like G Suite, you have to have support from executives. Because executives play three critical roles in a project like this. The first is they help you acquire resources. So that might be people or budget, and they have the ability to actually do that. They have the pull to actually make that happen. They create alignment, especially amongst the different executives who all have competing priorities and their own agendas. And they can be the face of the change. So they can be active and visible to the entire organization, and they'll be seen as walking the talk, right? So now that we determined that we do need to bother our executives, what do we do? So there's a quick exercise known as a sponsor heat map that can help you to identify what executives and leaders you need to engage and how. It might sound a little complicated, but it's something you can actually do on the back of an envelope. It's very simple. So the goal is to identify the key people that you need to gain support from. So obviously this isn't your entire org chart, it's just the most key individuals. So your first task would be to make that list of all the people that you think have influence on the success of your project. So it might look something like this. Next, you're going to assess where they stand and color code them. So if you have green, that means that they support the project and they play the roles that we've already mentioned. You don't need to worry about these folks. They're already in your back pocket. They already are on your side. Orange means that they support the project, but they don't always play all the roles of an executive that we would expect them to. Red would be opposing the project in general. And gray is you really don't have the information to make an assessment at this time. So once you've actually color-coded all of them, you can create your action plan. So you'll want to actually focus on just the orange, red, or gray, because the green ones you've already got. So if you're talking through your orange buckets, you'll want to have a conversation with those individuals on what you expect of your executives, how they can help you, how you can coach them, et cetera. If you're talking about red, you'll need to figure out how you can change their mind, or who can actually influence them to become more of a supporter. And gray means that you really need to meet with them immediately to actually understand where they sit. So they could be a supporter, they could be a resistor, you don't really know. And that can be kind of a scary concept when you think about your organizational leaders. So let's look at one example from this chart. If you see the vice president of operations on the right-hand side for you, we color them as gray, meaning we don't really know where they stand. If you look below, they're actually overseeing about 2/3 of the entire workforce of the company. So that's a pretty big red flag and a risk to your project, right? If 2/3 of your organization is overseen by someone who you don't really know where they stand on this project. So that means you should probably get a meeting on the books immediately to figure out where they are and how you can actually appeal to them. So when you think about executives and you start falling into that bad habit of not wanting to bother them, I'd urge you to either push yourselves or others around you to rethink that position. Personally, I don't see it as bothering your executives, and if you appeal to them with the fact that this change will affect all of their organization, their people, and it's an opportunity for them to change their processes and enhance the culture, many of them will be happy that you bothered them and glad to be a part of it. And it's really important to get that executive sponsor buy-in, but many of them are actually interested in making changes in their own organizations for the betterment of the company and of their own area of the business. And with that, I'll turn it over to Finn to talk about fail number 3.
Thanks, Travis. So, my name's Finn. My background is in psychology, so this failure about behavior change and upskilling people is something that's really close to my heart. And I think for me, this failure is all about avoiding the temptation to see training as something that's a nice to have. It can be an optional that's either left to the end of the project, or it can be de-scoped when budget constraints and there are trade-offs made. I think this comes down to a couple of misconceptions. The first is that training can be expensive, and when it's not done well, sometimes it doesn't have the impact that you want it to have. And so when budgets get tight, it can be the first thing that's cut. The second, I think there can be a perception that, hey, this is just Gmail, right? It's got to be easy to use. What training is actually required? And then I think these can be exacerbated by potentially a lack of collaboration with HR or learning and development, who may have existing resources which can be leveraged to answer this problem. And so what happens when this failure occurs? As Travis mentioned, people are just really bad at learning new skills or changing their own behaviors. I've been trying to learn Czech for the last 7 years. I know about 50 words, so I'm not getting on very well. I haven't put the structures in place to reward myself for doing that new behavior. So I think if you're expecting people to work in a different way, but you're not providing the right structure and support around them, you're not going to get the result you want. People will end up doing work in the same way, just using a slightly different set of tools. You're not going to get the impact that is possible. So how do we get around this? The way that we think about this with customers, I think is really the challenge we put to them is to be as granular and specific as they can. And I think in the history of learning, or in the history of really any sort of deployment, no one has ever said you knew your audience too well. So that's the first step for us, is to really dig deep into what the audience needs. So we use a tool called personas. It's a technique from design thinking, from marketing, and it really helps you move from thinking about the audience as being an anonymous group to a series of individuals. With a persona, you build up almost a portrait of this individual and what their learning needs are and what their emotional reaction might be to this change. So that allows you to get really specific about what they need from you. And I think a good rule of thumb is to have between 4 and 7 personas for your audience. And again, it just helps you parse your audience into different groups. So the executive assistant population will have a very different set of learning needs than that of your sales managers, for example. So once you've got a sense of who your audience is, I think the next level of granularity is to build some training paths for those personas. And by training paths, we kind of mean it's almost a learning roadmap. So how do you get persona A from working in this way to working in the way that you want in the future? What are the key learning needs that need to be met along the way? And then I think the third point is to develop an appropriate training mix. This can be a bit of a funny one because I think for lots of people, when you hear learning, you think, oh, it's face-to-face training. It's sitting in a classroom context, learning from an expert. Actually, so when you look at the best practice from the learning industry, there's a lot of talk about the 70-20-10 rule, whereby 70% of learning happens on the job, 20% of learning happens through informal ways of learning, either through peer-to-peer coaching or mentoring, and actually only 10% happens in that formal training face-to-face context. I think the 70-20-10 rule is a really useful frame to put on top of your training paths to say, right, what are the learning needs which we can meet through informal ways of learning? What are the learning needs which can be learned on the job? And actually, where are some of the real pain points where we need to focus our effort through formal learning channels? And this touches on the last point, which is training people on the use cases, or training people on the moments that matter, the really gnarly problems that they are going to need support. There's an increasing body of evidence from adult learning psychology that shows targeted learning interventions really focused on a specific problem are a more effective way of changing behavior in the long term, rather than taking everybody out of the business for a one-day sheep dip experience, which takes a lot of time and it's expensive. So I'd encourage you to think about going through this kind of chain of granularity to get really specific on where, how, and what you need to get, or where, how, and what people need support for. Okay. The next failure, I think, is a little bit related to this. I think there's, again, there's a temptation to hide everything away, until something's ready, and then you release it and say, ta-da, we're ready to go, here's this new thing. That sense of ta-da doesn't really work. It works for Penn and Teller. If you're trying to land a big behavior change across an organization, it's not going to work. And when we see this failure happen, it kind of typically looks like this. There'll be one really well-crafted email sent out from typically the executive sponsor, and it will have some really good, well-crafted messaging, and the stuff is really good, but it's got a subject line which says something like, important, please read, G Suite transformation, da-da-da-da, and the subject line is so long, you can't actually see what it's about. It doesn't hook people in. And then when you add on some of the other problems that we've seen, that it's sent from a single email address to thousands of people, it looks like it could be a phishing scam. What happens when this kind of approach is used? There's noise and confusion. People have questions, and it's natural. You think about the fact that people are busy and we're really bad at change. If they get one email telling them one piece of really important information, it's not going to make a big difference. It will cause noise, and that noise means that the project team has to scramble at the last minute to get more messaging out. So you then start pulling in marketing, communications, L&D to say, let's get our message out about this thing. And that last minute scramble at the end leaves the audience feeling as if this deployment has been sprung upon them, as if it's something that's been done to them rather than in collaboration or with consideration about what they need. So I don't think that's a situation that anybody wants to be in. So when we work with our customers to think about communications, we kind of think about it from a top-down and a bottom-up perspective. From a top-down perspective, thinking about the messaging or the campaign that you want to go out with, it's really tempting to go straight to the how things are going to be different in the future. Actually, I think this misses a trick, which is to take a step back and paint a picture of why this change is important. If you haven't seen Simon Sinek's TED Talk on starting with why, I would really recommend doing so. I think it's a really good articulation of the importance of painting the picture of a vision up front. And what this allows you to do, it acts as a platform to articulate the benefits of this change for the organization and for employees themselves. When you start to layer on the audience personas that you've got into that messaging, you can actually start to get quite specific and creative with some of the comms that you go out with. That's kind of something to think about from a messaging perspective. From a delivery perspective, we kind of think about the 3 M's. So there's the moment, the medium, and the messenger. The moment is all about the timing. When and how often are you going to tell people, give people this information? The medium is about the channel mix that you're going to use to meet people where they are so that they gather that information. And then the messenger is making sure that you've got the right combination of folks who are going to be spreading that message for you. That's the kind of core of a fairly solid comms approach. I think one of the questions that we're asked is, how often should you tell people about this change? How often should communication go out? I don't think we've got a single right answer. I think the rule of thumb that we kind of work with customers is the rule of 7, which is an old marketing adage that if you want someone to do, you have to tell someone something 7 times before they will do something with that information. Now, whether that needs to be 9 times in a world where there's increasing digital noise, that's up for debate. I think it may trigger a concern for some that, we're over-communicating. We're telling people too much. I think our kind of point of view is that oversharing in this context is definitely better than undersharing. So that's how we sort of think. That's some of the ways that we think about top-down communication. If you rely on just top-down communication, I think there's a risk that you are disconnected from your audience, that you're missing a feedback loop that helps you get a sense of how things are landing. I think this is where the role of a really well-structured and well-managed champions network can be important. We think about a champions network almost as being like a tree. So at the bottom, you've got your exec sponsors, who they're normally at the top of the org chart, so it's a bit different to see them at the bottom. And they're like your roots. Then you've got your core project team. So they're the kind of the trunk of the tree. And then as you add in regional variations, you'll have more branches. But actually, the superstars of the show are the leaves. And that's kind of how we think about the champions. That's where the action happens. Their role is really important for a few reasons. While the exec might be the visible face in head office that is sponsoring this, the champions are the tangible person on the ground who people can go and ask questions to. I talked earlier about informal ways of learning. That's one of the roles that the champions should be able to play, to do some of that peer coaching and to answer some questions that people have. And then I think the third thing that's really important when thinking about champions is that they're empowered to be creative and innovative. They're almost your ear to the ground. So if they know that there is a sales team somewhere still using an offline spreadsheet to facilitate a pipeline conversation, they should be empowered to go and work with that group to help them innovate and re-engineer that process to make it work better on G Suite. And I think champions are really important for generating that sense of kind of bottom-up pervasive communication. They also have an added benefit that they can provide a sustained informal network of relationships within an organization that can be re-engaged in the future. So while these individuals, over time, their time commitment to this project will decrease, but that network of relationships still exists if it's required in the future. And the last thing I think is really important, and it's the last note that I'll end on, is letting these people be creative and come up with new ideas, I think, is really important. The more that the communications approach can feel different from what has happened before, I think the more successful it will be. So on that note, I'll hand over to Carol for our last video.
Okay, so finally, the last fail. You're at the end of the deployment. It's gone reasonably well with few bumps in the road successfully managed. And it's actually so tempting to think about, we're done. Let's relax now, okay? So while it's very important, and there is a need for us to celebrate and for the users, those who are part of early adopters and core IT, to take stock, it's at the same time a great opportunity for us to sort of like kick off project post-deployment. So as we all know, while the migration might have been finished by now, it's actually the beginning of the journey for the majority of your users, right? Those people will have all those questions around how does it benefit me? What's the impact of this new technology of G Suite, cloud projects? What's the impact of this technology on my day-to-day activities and on my workflows? So we have to be ready with a structured change management approach from communications, from training perspective to address that. So following that temptation to actually stop the project at the go live, you will put yourself in a situation that you're risking and you're not being able to see the desired outcome, right? So we spoke quite a lot about how to make that change stick, and we shared quite many hints and best practices so far. So in a nutshell, what's the best strategy for us post-deployment to truly make that change stick and encourage user to use the full potential of G Suite? So a few things that we're going to share, and this is actually the summary to what we've said so far. First of all, assign product owners. What I mean by that is that many of our customers land so-called guiding coalition in their organizations, a team that would continue that effort. There needs to be people accountable for communications, for training, engaging and stimulating that appetite in your organizations around the product. Second thing is about innovation. And that's something we've seen some of our customers applying transformation labs, running them on a regular basis to brainstorm and take their business processes to the next level. Another hint is around success metrics. So you've probably landed some key success metrics for the deployment. Some of them will be still relevant post-deployment, but we highly encourage you to think about what are those new success metrics for the overall organization when we think long-term. And as some of you probably know, in Google Enterprise Edition, we've got Work Insights tool that helps us out to draw that data, meaningful insights around how people use the product to collaborate between different business units. And then last but not least, you know that the product is dynamic. There are some new versions of it, new releases. So having a structured approach on how do we train our users on those new releases and translating how that impacts their workflows is extremely important. So in order to successfully land the technology and make that change stick, we have to think about change management as an ongoing exercise. I've had the pleasure to help build our customer success methodology, which is all about what are those best practices, what are those key activities and key tips that we should incorporate in that particular strategy post-deployment to make sure that we're being successful long-term. So the key message here from our presentation is to make sure that while you're rolling out this new technology to end users, make sure that you invite them on that journey, that you involve them in the project with having a champions network, assigning different tasks, and at the same time having fun on the project to make sure that people have diversified ways of learning new things. Thank you very, very much for listening. We're going to wrap up with that. And while we still have a little bit of time left, I would like to ask you, we keep saying at Google that feedback is a gift. So especially for those of you who are smiling and for those of you who are experienced with delivering training, we oftentimes ask our attendees to provide that feedback. So if I could ask you right now to take your mobile phones and in your app, mark the attendance and the feedback, provide feedback for us, that would be fantastic. Just to let you know, if you have any questions or any other feedback that you would like to provide, we will be available just literally in front of the room just to make sure that we are navigating traffic. We will be available in front of the room if you have any questions or any feedback. Thank you very much for attending our session and for listening. Thank you.